Hey everybody! Luminar AI has finally been released just a few days ago, and today I'll be testing how well it runs on Apple's new M1 processor. I will also compare its performance side by side with a mid-2018 Intel-powered MacBook Pro. What is Luminar AI? Since you're watching this video, you probably already know, but for those that don't, Luminar AI is a really powerful photo editing tool made by a company called Skylum. Luminar AI is in many ways similar to Adobe's Lightroom, but it packs some features that are entirely absent in Lightroom, or would require Photoshop and lots of time to achieve the results that you can get with Luminar AI, all in one software and boiled down to just a few easy to use, time-saving adjustment sliders. A quick rundown of the specs before we get started. The M1 Mac that I've got is the MacBook Pro 13-inch base model with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. And the Intel Mac that I'm comparing it to is my 15-inch mid-2018 model with Intel's Core-i7, 16GB of RAM and 516GB of storage. I'll begin with a fresh install on both machines. Just like Luminar 4, Luminar AI is not running natively on the M1 processor. It's utilizing Apple's Rosetta 2 translation environment, and that means that it's not taking full advantage of M1's capabilities. So right out of the gate, at least in theory, the M1 Mac is at a disadvantage. But if you've watched my previous video or heard anything about the M1 chip and Rosetta 2, you'll know that for the most part, they handle unoptimized x86 apps quite well. In my previous video, I did a similar comparison but with Luminar 4. Feel free to go watch that. But in a few words, the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro outperformed the Intel Mac in every scenario. Not by a lot, but the M1 had one distinct advantage over the Intel Mac, and that is its totally silent performance. Installing the app took 1 minute and 52 seconds on the Intel Mac and 2 minutes and 4 seconds on the M1. The Intel Mac finished first, 12 seconds quicker than the M1. Now let's see how long it takes to open up the app for the first time. The Intel-powered Mac opens the app first in just 18 seconds, while the M1 lags behind again, taking 29 seconds to launch the app. That's 11 seconds slower on the M1. For this next test, I prepared a folder containing 20 raw images shot on the Sony a7 III and copied that same folder to both machines. Because of how Luminar 4 and Luminar AI handled their libraries, adding that folder with 20 images took almost no time on both machines. One of the areas where I noticed a performance difference when comparing the M1 versus Intel when using Luminar 4 is when the image has to be re-rendered at a higher resolution, like when zooming and panning. So let's test that here. Without any edits applied to the image, there's no perceivable difference in performance. Now I'll apply some edits to this photo, and to make sure that they're the same exact edits, I'll be using one of Luminar's presets, which were previously called looks, now they're called templates. With just one click, I applied a whole set of edits to this picture, and with those edits there's a slight difference in performance. It may be somewhat difficult to tell, but the M1 Mac is just a little quicker to re-render the edited image when zooming and panning. Not by a lot, but if you're editing a large set of images, that slight boost in snappiness can make it a more pleasant experience. Now I'll apply the same exact effects to the rest of the images, which is super easy in Luminar, and it comes in really handy when you've got a series of photos and you want to maintain a consistent look between them. With the edited image selected, I simply copy, then select all, and paste to apply the edits across all 20 images. The 15-inch Intel-powered Mac finished first in 12 seconds, and the M1 Mac not too far behind at 16 seconds. Surprising results, since with Luminar 4, it was essentially the opposite, where the M1 beat the Intel Mac by a small margin. For this final test, I will export the 20 edited images to JPEG. I'm choosing medium sharpening, maximum image quality, and export. The M1 finished exporting first, and it took 6 minutes and 2 seconds, and the Intel Mac is still going. And just like with Luminar 4, the M1 Mac is completely silent while the Intel Mac has its fans on high. 36 seconds later, Intel-powered Mac finished exporting in 6 minutes 38 seconds. The M1 wins the final round. In conclusion, Luminar AI runs really well on the M1-powered 13-inch MacBook Pro with no issues or hiccups, despite having only 8GB of RAM versus 16 on the Intel Mac. It even performs better in some instances while running unoptimized software like Luminar 4 and Luminar AI. It's not a huge bump in performance with the M1 chip, but one of the biggest differences is fan noise levels. The M1 stayed silent the entire time, even when exporting, while the Intel-powered MacBook fans were spinning most of the time, even when just clicking between images. This has been my quick comparison of Luminar AI running on Apple's M1 chip versus Intel's mid-2018 Core-i7. I hope it's helped answer any questions you might have had about running Luminar AI on the M1 silicon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.